Okay, Shez, we are back. We are back. We haven't talked about Ferrari since the Canadian Grand Prix. How could I let you off the hook for a good, I don't know, 10 days now? I mean, what's going on with you?
I mean, I'm all about Ferrari, man. And
You're all about
I
Ferrari.
just couldn't talk about them. I was just too sad.
You were just too sad. And I know it's been a sad season. And by the way, there's crazy stuff happening all over the world. But guess what? We're here to address the most important thing on earth, which is can Ferrari survive whatever this SH1T is? I don't have an answer to that, Ches, but I have a lot of questions for you. Are you ready?
Well, it's a question for the ages. I think this has been a question that's been asked of Ferrari since time immemorial. I think even before
Well,
Ferrari existed, people were asking, "What do you do about Ferrari?" Because it's just a problem. Go on,
that's what we do.
hit
That's
me
what
with
we
some
do. I mean,
questions.
these moments in these seasons, right after 2007, are bittersweet for me because
Oh,
the last time there was a Ferrari champion, it was my guy who did it, and then since then there's been nothing, and now we're coming up on damn near 2 decades of just nothing happening, right? And that's pretty much what it is. So Shez,
I mean, it could have been worse. Can you imagine that your last Formula One world champion could have been Felipe Massa?
it could have been, yeah, it
I
could.
mean,
Well, technically it should be no. I mean,
Hall of Fame.
if we're gonna apply the rules correctly, but and that's neither here nor there. Listen, Chess, I have a bunch of questions for you, but and so there's been a lot happening, right? There's been a lot happening in the press, such that Fred Vasseur himself, in sort of the lead up to the Canadian Grand Prix, had to come in and address all the rumors from the Italian media, particularly two publications that ironically are owned by the same ownership group that owns Ferrari. And it's more complicated than that, but you can look it up. It's essentially all under the same umbrella, right? So take that from me. But the reality is that they're putting pressure on their own guys. And I found the press conference to be very symbolic of where Ferrari's at, and I find myself torn, right? So I want to kind of go through this in a sequence. So my key to this conversation, Chez, is that we're going to take a little bit of sort of an overview approach to it. We can talk about the on-track stuff, but I think that's pretty well documented what their challenges are. Obviously, we'll get into that. But since I've done a lot of my scholarly work, I'd like to believe in organizational behavior,
Oh, I
I
love
am
it.
fascinated by, yeah, exactly. I'm fascinated by what Ferrari's doing. So I have identified some key stakeholders, right? And here they are. Number one, it's the top level leadership. So it's John Elkann and Benedetto Vigna. However you want to parse them together, they're essentially the same group. You have Fred Vasseur as the team principal, and then you have the Ferrari drivers. And we can talk about the Ferrari team as a whole, but it doesn't feel fair to kind of put people under the microscope that most of us really wouldn't even know and honestly be able to intelligently talk about in terms of what they do. I'm talking about race strategists, et cetera, et cetera. We've been plenty critical of them, okay, Shaz? So let's get started. Let's start with the most obvious place, right? Which is Fred Vasseur, because he is the one that gave the press conference. And I don't know if not the press conference. He was in the press conference, and there was Q&As around his future, but more importantly, his team's future. And I saw a very furious Fred. I dare I say, Shez, the most passionate Fred I've heard of in the last, what is it, 2.5, 3 years that he's been with the team was that particular. I cannot remember another time where he was so passionate in the way he responded to these questions. Maybe outside Carlos Sainz in Vegas the first time around, but that's about it. Shez, what do you make of what Fred is doing? Like, what do you make of what he's saying and what he's doing? Like, these are two questions there.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess those are two separate things. What he's doing and what he's saying, um, both I think deserve a different kind of answer because what he's saying. There's a quote that I think most of the print media, the legacy media, the F1 specialist media took offence to, which was that it's the media that are holding Ferrari back. It's your fault, and um, he made an example of the fact that the media had propagated some rumor that Enrico Balbo was going to be replaced within the team, and he then came to Fred and said, "I haven't heard anything about this. What's going on?" And Fred had to be like, "Whoa, chill, man. That's not what's happening." And he used that as an example. Um, and I've listened to a couple of podcasts like since we last spoke, and you can sense that there's a little bit of the media taking that a little bit personally, especially the two publications that you're talking about, Corriere della Sella and della Sera, is that right? Corriere della Sera,
Della Sera. Yep.
and Gazzetta della Sport. Um, both of them said, "Look, no man, we love you, but like we do have to criticize you. That's how this works, Fred." Um, and and I get that. I get that they're a little bit upset, but Fred does have a bit of a point. Um, but I think his job is very difficult in 2025. The most direct example to compare him to is another Frenchman that ran Ferrari in the mid 90s and early noughties and went on an absolute domination plex. You know, Ferrari just swept everybody before them like nobody had before. It was unbelievable the level of consistency they had at that time. And Jean Todt at the time, that's who I'm talking about, just for the avoidance of any doubt.
Good thing.
Jean Todt's job literally was to shield his team from the press and from the higher level executives, who at the time was Luca de Montezemolo, who basically ran Ferrari and had a good track record. You know, he had been in Jean Todt's position before, shielding Niki Lauda from the old man himself, Enzo Ferrari. So this is a well-worn route to success at Ferrari, right? You have somebody, a manager who was given a little bit of room to protect those underneath him. And one of the things that Jean Todt and Ross Brawn especially did in the 90s and early noughties was that they got rid of any newspaper clippings and things that were in any of the coffee rooms and stuff in Maranello. That was something that was part of a tradition. It used to be that the employees were encouraged to read the press clippings and things, but how can that ever be a good thing? The press don't know what is going on unless you tell them what is going on. And the most toxic, caustic, finger pointing stuff is what you are going to read in the papers, and it's going to make you feel a bit rubbish. It's going to make you feel like your job's on the line. It could never really make you perform, and that was what they got rid of. But Fred is now living in an age where everyone's got their mobile phone, unless the Maranello Wi-Fi says sorry you can't have Twitter and sorry you can't have Instagram, but you're going to have it at home, and your mates are going to have it, and they're going to text you what people have said on social media, and this article just came out, what's going on. It's difficult to shield the team completely from that, and I think that is what Fred's saying, that I don't have that control over the media that my predecessors did in the past when they got rid of all of this stuff, and now I'm having to deal with it, and you guys don't actually know what's going on. That's one side of it. But the other side of it is what does he do, right? Because there clearly is something that's not working at Ferrari from a technical point of view. They've brought in Loic Serra. He's only been there. He's been there less than a year. Not enough time to really have any impact on the car that is there at the moment. As per Fred, he's saying this is not Loic's car. This is Enrico Cardile's car, and we're having to deal with that. We haven't brought any upgrades to this car so far, but they're coming, and we've got work, and there is some potential. But but his sort of modus operandi when it comes to dealing with the press at the moment is, look, you have burned me with what you've said in the press, so my response to that is we're not going to tell you anything. And the problem with not telling anyone anything is that they just make stuff up, right? But what you're saying is interesting, isn't it? That all of the pressure that's been put on Fred, all the shielding that he's doing, if he's also not able to be open to the bosses above him because he fears that they don't understand or they're going to start meddling, means that John Elkann's also going to look at the team and all he can see is the results, and he's going to say, what the heck's going on? I brought in this guy who was supposed to change everything, and we're in the same cycle that we always are. So I feel sorry for Fred. I still think he's the guy that's going to get them out of this. If anyone has the best shot of doing it, I don't think suddenly bringing in Christian Horner is going to work. As with all of these big names. They work in an environment that allows them to do the job they've been tasked with doing. And Christian Horner works in an environment where he has a lot of autonomy, and that's been both a good thing and a bad thing, especially recently. But Ferrari doesn't work like that, and Fred's not really being allowed to work like that, and that I think is why we're seeing angry Fred, and not quite as effective, at least on the face of it, Fred. But that's me. I don't see a better person than Fred in that role, and I think that if you're going to bank on someone to get the job done, he's a good guy. But I know that not everybody shares that view.
Well, I mean, I think the idea that you would replace Fred Vasseur at this point in time is just preposterous. Like, I don't even, and to your point, I don't even know who you would get that would be able to do the job, let alone all the stupidity that surrounds Ferrari management, right? I mean, I mean, I think we should just put that to the side because you're right. If anyone can bring Ferrari through this, it's got to be Fred. And let's be honest, this stuff has got to take a lot more time than just 1 or 2 seasons. And we'll get to that in a little bit, Ches, when we talk about Elkan and Benedito Vinia. But here's what I want to say about Fred, because I have been critical of him here recently, right? After being a fanboy for him pretty much a good part of the last 2 seasons. And the reality is that Fred has done many things correctly, and yet he's not done the type of things that you would have hoped someone like a Fred Vasseur would have done coming into Ferrari, right? I mean, part of the lore of having Fred Vasseur come into Ferrari was that he was going to be more, to your point, John Todd-like, to sort of like find a way to insulate the team, give them a safe space to fail, and repurpose, sort of go through this sort of constant iterative process where they can figure themselves out, right? So he's done that in some semblance, in that he's managed to reorganize the team in a certain way, and yet he's not been able to do things right. So I'll give him credit for the fact that he has taken this on the chin. He has been willing to go out there and be very vociferous in his own defense, and really by extension his team's defense. Like, I completely get the idea of the media throwing out names and causing issues. And by the way, it was not just Fred Vasseur. Like, James Vowles was sitting right next to him, and he basically said the same thing, which is that when you start tossing out people's names in the press, especially those folks that are behind the scenes, right, and are largely not supposed to be the face of whatever is going on. I mean, these are not Formula One drivers that are getting paid multi-million dollars and getting all the glitz and glamour that they're used to. Not that, by the way, they should deserve any abuse either, but they're more well prepared to take these on than some guy that's sitting in the back, even in a leadership role, that is not trained for any of this, and having their livelihood be kind of thrown up in flames in some way. So I 100% get that. But I think the problem with Fred is that if what he's trying to implement is a little bit archaic, right? And the reality is he cannot be Jean Todt like in the examples that you just gave, which is, in this day and age, there is no way to hide anything that happens, fake or real, perception or reality. It does not matter. Everything is going to get out there at some way, somehow. Someone's going to leak it. Some of those things are happening. So I think that Fred Vasseur would be better off borrowing a page from his good friend Toto Wolff's playbook a little bit, which is that, look, Shez, there's one great example of where Fred's failure comes, which is, for 10 races now, we have heard this phrase in some flavor, right? The car has potential. We just have to extract the best out of it on Saturday, right? The car is fast in Q1, but something's happening between Q1 and Q3, and we just need to figure out a way to maximize the potential. I mean, that phrase, maximize the potential, maximize the performance, put whatever you want on that spin. That helps only in the first 2, 3, 4 races, maybe 5 races, but you keep saying that over and over again. The problem then becomes is that you don't know as a consumer whether Fred knows what the problem is and he's covering up for it, or he does not know what the problem is, right? And both things are equally bad, but I think the second thing is way worse, which is when it feels like you as the team principal do not know what's happening or cannot explain it in a manner that makes sense without having to throw on anyone under the bus. That does not help. And look at what Mercedes do, Shez. You've come on here time after time, particularly in the last couple of years, and talk to us about how Mercedes do their debrief, right? After every race. And sometimes they raise their hands up, particularly when there was a lot of Lewis Hamilton fans talking about sabotage and yada yada yada. And what was that race with tire pressure off or something like that? They came on and they said, look, we did this wrong or we did that wrong. I think it's helpful to do something like that. Maybe not the exact same thing, but it's helpful to have a public debrief and say, guys, we raise our hands up. Like, we intended to do this, but why happened, right? We were wanting to do A, B, and C, but plan D or plan F came up, which is the other part of the more infuriating thing is they give their drivers all these different plans. And you hear this time after time again. The Ferrari driver says, plan C, and they say, no, plan F. And like, good God, how many plans do you have to have? So that's the second element of it, Ches, is that there's a little bit of an overcomplicating of things where maybe it just helps to be more simplistic. And the reality is that, Ches, at the end of the day, if you don't tell all of us what's happening to the best of your ability, at least from a purely technical standpoint, a race standpoint, then you're going to leave the door open for not just the two publications in Italy, but there are other publications all over the world. By the way, we live in a time and age where clickbait and getting eyeballs and views and clicks and all of those things are just what matters. So those publications are going to do that, if not for anything else, but for their pure survival, because it's going to get all of us talking, it's going to get more eyeballs, it's going to get quoted all over the place. So I think Fred has to change the way he approaches this purely from a PR standpoint. I'm not even talking about team or restructure or anything like that, because it's far beyond my capacity to contemplate that. But it just feels frustrating time after time when we have to hear, well, the pace is in there. And then Fred's also, by the way, said some really, head scratching stuff. Like, I think it was a Saudi race or something where he said, well, towards the middle of the race, we had the best pace. Yeah. No SH1T, Sherlock. You were in P9 at that point, or whatever that race was. Of course, you were going to be driving faster than the race leaders that were managing their pace. So it's those type of things that frustrate the heck out of you. And I think Fred is a very smart and intelligent guy. So I don't want to do that. But it just feels like he hasn't sort of got ahead of the game in some ways, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is a messaging problem. I get that, but that idea of Ferrari potentially doing a debrief after every race in the way that Mercedes do, I think two things. One, it doesn't solve the fundamental issue, right? Which is that it's easy to not be criticised when you're doing well, right? Like you don't see the same criticisms being hurled at Andrea Stella, or you know when they were winning Toto Wolff, or when they were winning Christian Horner. You know, it, it's as soon as things are not going well, that's when the criticism starts to come, and that's what Fred is having to contend with now, because there was a period where Ferrari were actually doing pretty well. Last season, towards the end of it, they were probably the fastest car on balance on the grid. And yes, there are questions to be asked this season about why is it that you've taken on a new driver, you've changed quite a bit on the car, and suddenly you're nowhere near the front anymore. Like, what the heck has happened? But there's a fundamental difference, I think, between McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari, which is that if Fred or his representative turns up and does a debrief with someone just taking questions off of social media, every one of those questions gets and answers gets dissected to the nth degree. And what did he mean by that? What does he mean by that? This means that this is a disaster. We need to sack the person that made that decision. They didn't put the right tires on. They didn't have the right data. They need to sack someone to make that happen, because that's always been the way that things have been run at Ferrari. They say something, they make a mistake and they admit it, and the press is suddenly like, okay, that guy needs to go. We need that person's
Yeah,
head
but
on a platter. And
well, what do
how does that improve your team if no one's allowed to make a mistake?
Well, Shez, but that's happening right now anyway. No, it's happening right now. I mean, the example you just gave is happening because stuff is getting made out of thin air. I think there's a way to manage both things. I do not disagree with you in that Ferrari get the type of attention that no one does, right? And I get it. And I think the closest thing that comes again is Lewis Hamilton's past couple of years with Mercedes when he struggled and the team struggled. So that's not even a good comparison, but at least comes in the same realm. And what I would applaud Mercedes for is that they're coming out and doing this time and time again, Shez. There is something to be said about when you come out and you do this thing directly with the public, at least you get to control the narrative. Now, it may not change anything in terms of performance, Shez, but Shez, the one way to solve any problem you have, we have, anyone else have, is to acknowledge that there's an issue, right? So if you cannot acknowledge it
But
and you
how does that
cannot
make it
acknowledge it,
go?
it doesn't.
But telling us about it, or
What does
placating
not
the media, how does that make their car faster?
it does not make the car faster, but we're talking about having a PR issue, right? Right now we're talking about the PR stuff, which is if that
You
if
might be, but
but then you
but
cannot
I
come
thought we were
around and
talking
blame the press
about,
for it.
but
Yeah,
but I thought we were talking about whether or not Fred should continue in his role or not.
no,
That's
I don't. I mean,
because
that's a ridiculous thing.
that is what those two publications
Yes,
have
I understand
suggested.
that. But what you're seeing there is an outcome of months and months of frustration and not having clear answers. And my point to you is just what I just
But what
said,
if
which
the
is
answer is something they don't want to hear?
doesn't matter. They're gonna make up an answer anyway.
Well,
But
then
now
what?
you can at least
So
come
then,
up.
what difference does it
You
make?
can go to
What?
Ferrari's YouTube channel and get answers about it versus getting it from a press there. You can even effectively cut out the press. By the way, in this day and age, when athletes and teams have access to social media and all kinds of platforms like the ones we're doing this from, there's no need for the press. They could effectively eliminate the press in that regard. Like, I mean, you look at what's happening in the sport game, in the business of athletics all over the world. It's like athletes are taking ownership of their name, image, and likeness and stuff like that. So Ferrari could totally do that.
So,
They don't even need
so
the press to do.
I don't disagree with that, and I do think that they could probably do a better job of controlling their narrative, as you put it. I think that's not an unreasonable thing to do. But the fundamental issue here, for me anyway, is not about the messaging.
You're not going to change the press, though, Shez. You're not going to stop people from reacting that way.
Sure,
What you
but
can do
that's
is
not
you
what I was going to say.
can be as transparent as you possibly can, and that's one piece of the puzzle. By the way, I agree with you. That's not doing that by itself does not make the car go faster. But Shez, we also know you've watched 10 races now. It does not take a super technical person to understand that Ferrari are having issues with their ride height. I mean, any idiot that was watching 10 races could say, so what is the problem with you coming out and saying, guys, we thought this would work. It didn't work. It's the same thing that Mercedes did with the zero pod, which I know they fully never admitted to.
Yeah,
But even if that is an
yeah, but Ammar,
admission,
that's the trap that you then fall into. Is that Mercedes are always on the cusp of we know what's wrong, we're going to fix this thing, and suddenly it's going to be better. And like it took about a year and a half before we all clocked on to what they were saying, which was they don't actually have a clue. And Ferrari are currently in that. They're just not telling us they don't have a clue. They're just not telling us anything.
well, we know that they don't have a
And
clue. That's my point. Like you don't even
that's fine.
but
So
that's
that doesn't make them any different to Mercedes. And nobody, well, there obviously were people
wow.
asking for James Allison's head, but there weren't. It wasn't that. It wasn't like the entirety of Formula One, because that's what happens when it's Ferrari. Everyone in
Here's
Formula One has an opinion, and they're like, boom, get rid of Fred, get rid of the
so
technical team. But
there
that's what everyone's head. That's where everyone's mind goes to. Whereas other teams, I think, get more leeway. They are allowed the
for sure. I
space
mean, of
to
course.
to say, look, we got it wrong. Ferrari don't get that opportunity. Because if they admit they've done something wrong, well, if you've done something wrong, get somebody else that will do the right thing then. And that's no way to
But no
run.
one can do the right thing. I mean,
Yeah, but Ammar, what you're saying is very logical and it makes sense. But to the mass, it doesn't. To the mass, they're like, no, it's very simple. If you've got it wrong, bring in someone that gets it right. And you cannot run an organization when that is the mentality that's being thrown
right.
at it.
100% correct. And then you get what you get right now, which is some of the same thing. And I don't know about others.
So can we switch this up a little bit and take the
Sure.
heat off of Fred a little
Fred,
bit? Because
let's go
actually,
to John.
I thought your
Yep.
comment about the fact that John Elkann and Stellantis, who own Fiat, also Peugeot, Citroën, just FYI, Fiat, who owns Ferrari, and have a say in what the press in Italy say, is now meddling in the press potentially, questioning Fred Vasseur. Now tell me how that is helping Ferrari.
No, it isn't helping Ferrari.
So
And
why
again,
is that
this
not the
this
fundamental
is my
issue here?
no, what you can't go out and change somebody else, Shez. This is my point to you. If you're Fred Vasseur and you're Ferrari, if you're Fred Vasseur, right? And we now we can bring John Elkann and as you said, if I'm Fred, I'm saying, look, there are people that are gonna make up stuff about me, about my team. I want to be the protective the guy that I'm. Guys, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go out and tell everybody ourselves what it is. So we get to tell. You don't get to hear from Gazzetta dello Sport or whatever else publication is out there, whether it's in Italy, Germany, UK, whatever, it doesn't matter. We're going to control our own mistakes. We're going to talk about it our way. And I would rather be me putting the hand up and saying, we got this wrong, right? So that's my point. And Shez, okay, so let's get to your point. Why would John Alcan meddle in this? I have no earthly idea. No one does. No one really knows, Shez. But I would just tell you that on a simple, I'm just talking about it from a business standpoint, this is a win-win for John Elkann. If he thinks that he's lighting a fire under Fred's butt or whatever the logic is, that could maybe work. That couldn't maybe work. But again, those publications, I don't know how well they're doing, but most publications in this day and age are struggling. So it helps for them to be in the news. It
But Ammar,
absolutely does. That's a
presumably,
day and age
yeah,
in the
yeah,
media that we
mate,
are.
mate,
So
that clickbaity nonsense, that rage bait stuff that's coming out, and the rumors that they want to get rid of Fred do not help Ferrari. There is no way that John Elkann is going, oh,
they
cool,
have to
we're going to
learn.
get a few
Yeah.
more views because this is out in the media. No way, man. Like
It's not about helping
the
Ferrari.
thing that helps Ferrari the most is them winning championships. And yes, that
Of course. Of
ultimately,
course.
ultimately, Ferrari's entire marketing budget is their
There you
Formula
go.
One team.
Correct.
That's the
Correct.
thing. But
So
if you have a Ferrari Formula One team that is misfiring, that's not a well functioning marketing. That's not good. And
yeah.
what I would say to you is, you know, I think you're about to start saying that you can't change other people. Well, Fred definitely cannot, because John Elkann is the big man. He's the guy in charge. And ultimately, if he doesn't have faith in Fred Vasseur and is openly saying that, then Fred will automatically get all of this stuff from people saying he needs to go, because that's what you've been fed by the media to believe, that it's Fred's fault. He's not communicating properly. He's the person that's causing Ferrari to not perform, and that then allows you to get rid of him, and everyone's happy about it. But the problem isn't Fred; it's John Elkann or Benedetto Vigna, because what will happen is that the next person will come in. They'll have a little honeymoon period where everything's great, and then the same things will happen, and then you'll have the same little media outlets saying, "Oh, you need to get rid of Fred because he's not communicating." Or the next person, he's not communicating. Ferrari aren't doing very well. It's always a he. And ultimately, the people in charge never have to take accountability for what they are creating. And this is a story that is as old as time when it comes to Ferrari. Enzo meddled and didn't let his team do the thing that they needed to do. And they didn't win for the longest time. When Ferrari have been successful, it's because the middle manager has said F you to Enzo or the board or Luca de Montezemolo or John Elkann. That's when Ferrari function, is when the top tier are held at arm's length and are told, you give us the money, we are the specialists that understand how a Formula One team is supposed to work and gain success. It's not the other way around. You cannot tell us what to do. And if you want to look at other examples from outside
Well,
Ferrari, Toyota did the
I
same
mean,
thing. As soon as Toyota tried to impose a Toyota mentality on their Formula One team, gone.
it didn't work. Yeah.
When Honda did the same thing, gone. And Ferrari, for everything, that all the romanticism and everything else that we put on them, are ultimately a corporate entity, and the people at the top think they know best. They think that because they've sold a bunch of Ferraris, or that they've managed to win in the World Endurance Championship, that suddenly they are experts at running a Formula One team. And what you don't understand is what teams like Williams and McLaren and Red Bull and Mercedes now have understood. Mercedes are a great example of this, by the way. That
Red Bull are too from that matter, but yeah.
that actually the corporate needs to stay the hell out of it. They just provide the cash and let the specialists do their job. It's like a patient or the chief exec of a hospital who has no medical knowledge telling the surgeons how they should do an operation.
Shez, there are examples inside and outside sport, organizations, business, you pick it up. Any place where there's micromanagement is not a place that succeeds. I mean, we could spend hours and hours talking about it. So your point is 100% correct. I mean, if John Elkann and truly signed off on this, right, then he should be ashamed of himself. He really should be ashamed of himself for doing that because he doesn't have the guts then to go directly to Fred Vasseur and fire him if that's really what he wants to do. And by the way, most of us Ferrari fans are now onto it, man. Like it's fine if you fire the first guy, the second guy. By the time you're onto your third guy, man, and you keep firing people, like in any organization, the finger is going to come back at you. And it is back on John Elkann. So this is 100% on John and Benedetto Vinia if that's what they're signing off on, if this is the game that they're going to play. And I think maybe what Fred Vasseur was trying to say in his sort of very vociferous and sort of painful sort of pushback is that I wonder if that was a veiled message to John Elkann and Benedetto and say, okay, if you keep doing this, then we're not going to succeed anymore because there are people that feel like they're walking on eggshells and whatnot. But Shez, I think your point about Mercedes is well taken, right? It also takes a principle like Toto Wolff to make that happen too. I mean, it takes two to tango, right? And that's what I mean when I say Fred needs to step up in a way that he is almost like an owner or part owner in all of this, right? And say, okay, this is just how I'm going to
Yeah,
operate. Like if
but
you want
that's
to can me,
but that's never going to happen at
but I
Ferrari, though, is
understand
it?
that. I understand. What so this is what I'm getting into. Ferrari, wake the hell up. It is the 21st century. This is not 1950 anymore. Like that's not going to work. All of that stuff, the success under Jean Todt, all great. But guess what? You're now competing with the
But
Mercedes and the Red Bulls of the world,
but
and maybe
that's
even the Lawrence Strolls of the world. So
But Ammar, but
wake the hell
that's
up.
a limitation of the Ferrari
Correct.
model, though, isn't it?
Yes.
That there is no way at any point that a team principal or a chief
Well,
designer. This is one of the reasons that Adrian Newey didn't come to Ferrari and did go to
correct.
Aston Martin. Is that none of those people are ever going to be allowed to actually have ownership of the company. It just is not going to happen. But Mercedes
Chaz,
independently came to the conclusion that if they were going to be successful in Formula One, the Mercedes board in Stuttgart had to say, all right, we'll give you the money, we could see the success on track, and we will let you guys do your job.
correct.
But it's
I'm
not
not.
what any other corporate has ever done really in the history of
Yeah,
Formula One.
but this is the thing, Shaz. I mean, this is again, this happens in life, in and off, in and outside the track. All right. Every organization, particularly the ones that survive in the long run, always evolve. And that is where Ferrari has got to evolve. And it's got to start at the top. You're right. One aspect of this is not micromanaging, which makes 100% sense in the world. Now, you can formulaically design that setup to be anyway. It can be the Christian Horner Red Bull setup, right? Or it can be the Toto Wolff Mercedes setup or some other complete different setup. I'm not necessarily advocating that you give Fred Vasseur ownership a stake in the team or anything, though you should be open to that if that's really what you believe in, right? Particularly if the guy is going to be leading your team, that's different from an Adrian Newey who is a designer at the end of the day. He is not a team principal. He doesn't have the vast portfolio that a Fred Vasseur type of position would have. So maybe that's the investment that they would need to make and look at that as an investment. But maybe not even that.
Mate,
Forget
it's
that.
not about people.
Forget that.
It's about the structure. Look,
I agree.
the
But
ideal solution to all of this, right, is that you have somebody in a John Elkann, Benedetto Vinia position
that's
that knows how to run a Formula One team. And successfully knows how to run a Formula One team. Then you have somebody that has shares in the company, so has skin in the game. And can also make a success of the Formula One team.
exactly.
But Ammar, what that does is that it assumes incorrectly that the things that make a Formula One team successful are also what make a car company successful, and those two things are not the same.
Yes.
And it's something that
Right.
that manufacturers time and time again have had to learn the hard way. So so for Ferrari, the only model that would actually work is doing what Mercedes have done, is get somebody like Fred in, but give them
Something.
money, give
Yeah.
them a
That's
skin in the game, give them a
correct.
share of the company. But it's the one thing they cannot do, because they cannot give up shares to somebody that isn't like Ferrari corporate, Fiat corporate. That
Yeah.
it will
No,
never happen,
look,
because Italy won't let it happen. And
yeah.
and,
Well,
and, and as long as that is the case, we are doomed to see Ferrari act in this way, unless you get a true leader who is able to say, it doesn't matter what the shareholders are saying. I understand that they have concerns, but I'm not gonna listen to them. I'm gonna trust the person that I've put in charge of the Formula One team, even if they are going through a rough patch. I'm gonna let them work their way out of it. But
correct. A la Red Bull.
nobody has had the guts to do that at Ferrari. But
Everyone's
yeah,
everyone's just trying to
but
save their
your
own
okay,
seat. But
your Red Bull example is interesting, right? Because the thing for Red Bull is that when they entered, Dietrich Mateschitz literally had what, he came in 2005, 06,
Mhm.
07, 08. He brought in Adrian Newey, right? And actually, the team year on year on year as a whole got better, to the point where they won a race in 2008,
yeah,
right?
I mean, they were nowhere too before that, so there was going to be improvement. Like, I mean, when you
But
start at zero, even one is better, right? It's
exactly. But
100%
since
improvement. So
then, they have not changed anything at all,
correct,
right?
correct.
In terms of like the core team, it's only now in the last two seasons where
That they're
that
making.
has changed. And what will be really interesting to see is whether the board, the Uvidias, the Oliver Mintzlaff in Austria, actually keep their hands off the team in the way that Mateschitz did
Sure.
when the success isn't there, when they don't have the same players involved on ground level that knew how to play the corporate guys. But Fred, for all of his nous, doesn't have that yet. He doesn't
He
have
doesn't
the
have that.
he
No.
doesn't have the he might have a understanding of how Formula One teams work in a broad sense, but Ferrari is very specific, and I don't think he
Well,
quite has an understanding of how he can play the corporate um, to do what he wants them to do.
what we're essentially saying, Ches, is that if Ferrari want to be successful, they have to eat a little bit of humble pie, right? They have to come into the 21st century, be realistic about how they're going to perform in this era of Formula One. This is not the noughties and the Michael Schumacher, John Todd dominant runs. Like the game has changed, the world has changed, and you can pick up examples from all over the world. To your point about managing a car company versus managing a Formula One team and race teams, you can look at Mercedes, but you can also look at Disney as a great example of that. That is a multinational company with the kind of passion that Ferrari has in some ways, right? It's a very passionate brand. It's a family-run brand, or at least largely run by family, and it is a public company, by the way. But they run various operations that are very different, right? Your Disney Channel is very different from movie production, is very different from parks. It's very so there are plenty of ways that this can be done. There's no one formula that Ferrari needs to have. Like it doesn't even necessarily need to be give Fred
Yeah,
Vasseur a ownership
but
stake.
I don't think
It
Disney's
could
a good
just be
example of
that,
this at all,
but
because they've had the
the
same.
model.
Well, but they've had the same problem. They've put somebody in charge of the business, and like look, I never get to
I'm not
talk
saying it's without problem. No business
like
is
Ammar,
without problems.
I never get to talk about this, but like Star Wars is a big thing for me,
Oh my God. Oh, there we
right?
go.
And
All right, we're gonna lose him now.
look, the fact is that when the most recent Star Wars movies came out, there was a heap of criticism that came in through the press and through the media and through fans making their voices heard on social media, and there was a big
That's all
course
good
correct
stuff.
from the corporate who then lost sight of the fact that their creative team had a vision, and they then meddled. That for me is exactly what happens at Ferrari, what happened at Toyota, what happened at Honda. That that people that are beholden to shareholders who don't like what they see at ground level but don't understand the processes required to run a Formula One team feel like they have to meddle to make the shareholders
Yeah,
feel like
yeah.
they are getting their money's worth. But
But
that's a flawed way of thinking. It always has been. Um, and no matter how much we say it until we're blue in the face, Ferrari are a corporate entity that will not understand that. And until the team principal has skin in the game, as we've said, that will never change.
they
But
need
it
more than
can't
that. They
change
need
because
security.
Ferrari's
Yeah,
model won't let it change. So that's
yeah,
why I think it's great to highlight the problems and the potential solutions. But in a system like Ferrari runs,
yeah.
they are doomed to be like this forever. And
Correct.
it's really sad to say it, but that's the reality of Ferrari.
Correct. You're 100% correct. And again, this is we're agreeing on this, and it's this is all about looking at yourself in the mirror as an organization, as an entity at the highest levels. Maybe even the family needs to do that and say, well, how do we want to move forward in this new era of Formula One in general, and find a way to give Fred Vasseur skin in the game, security, whatever you want to call it. Like give him the ability to be himself, or whether you even bring in a Christian Horner tomorrow, you're going to need to do that too, by the way. So that, hey, look, man, the idea of them bringing in Christian Horner was just is just so stupid. Like the and replacing Fred, like as if that's going to change anything. But that's neither here nor there. Shez, let's move on to the drivers now, because at the heart of all of this is the drivers, right? And I want to save Lewis Hamilton for last, but I want to talk about Charles Leclerc too, because in the last 10 days or so since the last race, we've heard a lot about like Charles himself, right? And there's been a lot of back and forth on social media that I've had. I know you've been part of as well about, Charles' racecraft and where he's at. And I think here's what I want to say. I don't want to talk too much about the on-track stuff because there's really nothing to talk about at this point in time. We can always debate if he's better than George and Russ and Oscar and all that. The reality is they're all kind of thereabouts. Like we can pick flaws and everything. Here's my one criticism of Charles that I think is again emblematic in what transpired in Canada. We all know what Ferrari did with their pit strategy, right? They went hard mediums. They really shouldn't have done that. Like that was probably the worst strategy that they could come up with. But my frustration again is just as he's exiting the pits after having put on the new set of hard tires in the first pit stop, Charles gives the quote that we've read over and over again. Why did you guys put me on this strategy? Like, why did you guys? So I want to, instead of looking at it from the team standpoint, maybe ask, should Charles be better about this? Because there's been some suggestion that he's been with the team for what, 7 years now? What is it, 7, 8 years, give or take, whatever it is. And he's been a Ferrari driver before then. Is he not doing enough to establish his authority, in the sense that not authority is not establish himself as the guy to kind of listen to in these situations? Like, have we not seen enough? I mean, Carlos Sainz infamously called pit strategies from the cockpit too, right? So what is Leclerc not doing here? Do you think that's a flaw?
Uh, it, it's a tricky one. Yeah, sure, he could be better, but ultimately strategy isn't what Ferrari are paying him to be there to do. You know, I always I know I go back to what happened in the past and Ferrari's last era of ultimate success, right? But Michael was just a vessel. Like he didn't call strategy from the car. Um, you had Ross Brawn on the pit wall, and he had absolute trust that if Ross and his team had a strategy, then that was the best way to run that race, and he would just do what they told him to do, which was the best that anybody could do in that car. And Charles has that. He's got pace. He's got one lap pace. He's got tire management. Whether it's in traffic or at the front, and he's got really good racecraft. Yes, you can point at a couple of mistakes here and there, but there isn't a Formula One driver on the grid in this current era that hasn't had more errors than you think they should have. But the Carlos comparison is always, I think, a little bit flawed, because Carlos, by running strategy in the car, made himself look smarter, but he was doing that often to make up for a deficit in underlying pace against Charles. He's having to do that to compensate for the fact that he just isn't as fast as the guy in the other car. And ultimately, like the guy that isn't as quick it's probably not, unless the guy that is quicker throws it in the wall at every possible opportunity, and isn't able to fulfill the strategy that has been laid out by the strategy team. Um, More often than not, that faster driver is going to win races and is going to win championships. It's not going to be the guy that's slower but smarter. It just doesn't work that way. Um, so what I've always said about this is that Carlos was never going to win a championship if he had to call the strategy from the car. And actually, this goes back again to processes at Ferrari. I love a process, but Charles can call the strategy correctly every single time, but ultimately, unless the pit wall understand how to take the data they have in front of them, process it correctly, and then give a reasonable suggestion that isn't commit ourselves to 2 stops when we haven't even run a third of the race, they're not going to win races and they're not going to win championships. Ultimately, Charles gave his preference. He said, look, this is what I want you to do. And Ferrari just went, we're going to do what we want to do. And that's what they did. And he can't, sitting in the cockpit, he can't stop them and say, I'm not driving out until you put the right tyres on my car. Thanks. There has to be a level of trust with the pit wall. So I always take a bit of issue from people that say Charles doesn't call the strategy correctly. So, he's dumb, and therefore that's why he's not going to win a championship, because it misunderstands the fundamental role that Charles plays in that car, which is not to call the strategy.
You said something that's very interesting, which is that they don't seem to be on the same page, right? If Charles is sending this information and they don't need to, they're not processing it well, correct? So who's at fault for that? Should Charles be more demanding of these things being done better? Maybe not during the race, but after that. I don't know. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know what else he can really do other than jump out of his car, go to the pit wall, and then get back in there.
Perhaps
I don't even know what to do.
Perhaps the relationship is done, and maybe that's the problem here, right? Is that actually Charles
is his romanticism for Ferrari getting in the way
exactly that Charles perhaps, and not in terms of how he speaks to the team, but his loyalty to it.
Correct.
In that he has perhaps done everything he can to tell the team this is what I want, and for a time they listened, especially 2023 into 2024. They listened to the direction that he wanted the car to go in, and it was very successful. But then they've gone backwards, and now they're not listening to anyone. I don't really understand what they're trying to do now. And maybe that is just because Loic Serra just hasn't been able to get his foot under the desk just yet. But ultimately, maybe it is that relationship has got stale. It's just got to the point where they're not actually making steps forward. They don't communicate in a way that they should, and that actually they should go their separate ways. And perhaps Charles especially would do better at another team, even if it's not a team that immediately is as competitive as Ferrari should be.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The should be part makes a lot of sense, and I do worry for Charles because I'm a Charles Leclerc fan. I worry that his loyalty to his team, his infatuation with the Ferrari brand, in a good way, his personal connection, right? I mean, the Jules Bianchi, the connection, all of those things I feel are outweighing his ability to win a championship. And we're talking about this in a year where either Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris is going to win the championship before Charles Leclerc. And I think no matter how you argue this stuff, when this season started, if you had to pick a winner outside of Max Verstappen, it wouldn't have been those two guys. It would have been Charles Leclerc, it would have been Lewis Hamilton, maybe even George Russell, if you would have thought that Mercedes was going to be there. But realistically, just based on the body of work that he's put together, I feel really bad that he is no closer to a championship now than even 2 years
Oh,
ago.
Ammar, I feel the same way. I feel that George and Charles have been driving absolutely
They should be the
incredibly
competitors.
not just this season, but for the last 2 or 3 seasons they've been driving top of their game, and it's the McLarens that in the hands of Lando and Oscar, who's only been in Formula 1 for 3 seasons, who have the opportunity to win titles, and they're sitting there going what about us? Like, what more can we do? And I get that. I absolutely get their frustration.
Yeah.
But but
All right.
but but the
Well,
but the interesting thing is that George somehow still doesn't even have a contract for next
oh,
year.
juicy topic for our next episode. Well, let's wrap it up with Lewis Hamilton then, right? So where should Lewis go from here? Like
With a nice
I
bow.
am yeah, I don't know what to do if I'm Lewis. Like I really don't. I mean, I know that it's amazing, Shez. It's only taken 10 races for all of the all of the joy that Lewis Hamilton had going into Ferrari to wipe away. And he has the lone victory for them, by the way, such that a sprint win might be, right? It's not really a race win, but he has the only win for them. They've looked no closer to winning anything than that particular sprint race. I don't know what I do if I'm Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he's already talking about influencing culture and setting the team up for future years and stuff like that. I mean, to me, it sounds like he's resigned, even though he would never say those things. But I don't know, oh, man. And Mercedes actually got a race win this last weekend too. So I don't mean.
I think Lewis more than Fred needs to look at how he messages stuff, right? Like, he's always been somebody that wears his heart on his sleeve. You can always tell when he's happy, and you can always tell when he's not so happy. And the downers have been so massive this season, especially in Spain. Spain, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, right? Like Lewis has always been upbeat. There's always been that kind of like, yeah, I'm faster than everybody else, and that's a core self belief. But these ground effect cars seem to have shaken that belief in him, that like suddenly he's been met with it's not another competitor. It's not that he thinks that other people are faster than him. He is being defeated, I think he feels, by this formula, and that I think is what I'm struggling to look at. But actually, if you look at the absolute facts of his
It's not bad
Ferrari
season.
tenure, it's not that bad.
It's not
Um,
that bad, yeah. Yeah.
we talked about this the last time we chatted, but I have got some numbers because I love numbers. Um, but over one lap, um, there's only two drivers that have gone from a top team to another team over the winter, and those, ironically, are the two that have been either in a Ferrari or coming to a Ferrari. So Carlos Sainz went from Ferrari to Williams, and Lewis went from Mercedes to Ferrari. We know this. Last season, of the top four teams, Ferrari had the closest drivers in terms of one lap pace, right? Carlos
Hmm.
and Charles were closer than anybody else on the grid. It was less than a percentage, than 0.1 of a percent difference between the two of them, right? But
Hmm.
now Carlos has moved to another team. He's up against Alex Albon. Like there's an assumption here that I need to make with you that I don't think that Alex Albon is as quick a driver as Charles Leclerc. But
Oof. Wow, what a leap of faith.
I think we're gonna have to. I think we're gonna have to
Can
sort
we
of
can we take this leap? Okay.
have to agree on that. And I remember we had a conversation in a video that I think barely anybody watched, but it was a cracker, I thought, where we
Go back and
argued
watch.
about whether Alex Albon or Carlos Sainz would come out on top in this season at Williams, and you very vehemently said there is no way that Alex Albon is going to come out on top at Williams, and yet here we are.
Here we are.
But I think that
Humble pie.
this speaks very keenly to how difficult it is to go to another team in 2025 in this regulation step, because the window in which these cars operate is so narrow, and the way in which different teams try and approach that window is very different. Means that if you've worked out a way to do that at your team for like the last, and I'm just talking in this rule set, for the last 4 years, to suddenly have to do that in a different team is really difficult. And actually, if you want to look at the numbers, do you know what the difference is between Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon at the moment?
It's probably much more than a 0.1%, I'm gonna guess.
Correct. It's 0.2 of a percent now. So
Yeah, wow.
so Carlos has gone from being less than 0.1 of a percent away from the quickest driver on the grid, arguably, to being 0.2 of a percent away from Alex Albon. Do you know how far Lewis is away from Charles at the moment?
I'm gonna guess it's closer to the 0.1% than not.
Not far off. It's 0.18, right?
Yeah, there
So
you go.
just to say that Lewis and Carlos are experiencing the same problem, and Lewis has said the same thing as well, right? That the issues that Ferrari are having, although not completely separate, are slightly independent to the turmoil that he is going through, because for him, it's not just that Ferrari as a whole are underperforming. That's what Charles can complain about, because Charles knows that he's getting the absolute maximum out of this machinery. It's just that it's not very good machinery. Lewis is having that compounded by the fact that he is not performing well in it as well. So he's looking much more internally at, okay, what do I need to do to get better in the car? And maybe he won't get there this season. And actually, all the hard work that he's putting in isn't going to give him the reward this year. Perhaps that reward comes next year, because it's not through lack of effort, right? Like, I've heard so much about that ridiculous meme that came up after the F1 premiere in New York, the F1 movie premiere in New York, where there was like all of the grid standing on top of a building being photographed, and oh look, Max Verstappen is doing an endurance race in Spa. That, for me, I think I tweeted this. That's Max Verstappen's version of virtue signaling. I think, right? It's like saying that because he's doing that, look at me, I think about nothing but racing. That's what makes me amazing. All of the other drivers do exactly the same thing, and Lewis is no different. He spends more hours at a Grand Prix after a race is finished than almost anybody else. He's still sat in a sim, doing something that
Yeah,
he
I
doesn't
know.
actually even like doing,
Yeah.
because he wants to be better and understand what can make him better in the car. So it's not through lack of effort or him doing the Met Gala or promoting the movie. These are things that he does, but he organises his time. I read Charles Leclerc saying the thing
Well,
that impresses him the most about Lewis is the fact that he organises his life so much to be able to put the most that he can into Formula One and get the most out of it that he can. Um, but it's
well,
just, it might just be that all of that hard work doesn't pay off until we get into next season.
I mean, the stupidity of that meme is I mean, those of you that are keyboard warriors that are going to decide how motivated a seven-time world champion is just insane to me. Like you should be ashamed of yourself if that's what you're doing. Like Twitter fingers, get out of here with that stuff. Like, so Shez, I agree with you. I think look, even though I failed spectacularly on my Carlos Sainz prediction, I think I was more or less right about Lewis Hamilton versus Charles Leclerc, which is what I remember saying very clearly, that Lewis is going to struggle in part because of having to shift teams, but in part because understanding stuff at Ferrari is just nothing. No, it's not as easy. It's about as easy as swatting a fly down, if that's something to be noted, right? But you can't actually do that. Yes, yeah, we can. But I mean, so look, this is what Lewis is going to deal with. I think you're right. I think all the proverbial eggs are in next year's basket, right? Because rule set, presumably a lot of change, aero coming into play a little bit more, no DRS, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we can go into that a little bit later on, but that would have had to be a plan. I would argue that even in a normal year, let's say even if we were in the middle of a regulation, I think the first year is a little bit of a mulligan, because that you can't really possibly make that kind of shift, because Lewis had been at Mercedes for damn near a decade, maybe a little bit more than a decade, I think. So you can't make that change. That's just natural adjustment phase, let alone everything that Ferrari brings with him. But I will sort of take a little bit of give you a little bit of pushback on what you said about Lewis needs to improve his messaging. Absolutely not. He needs to be doing the same thing he's doing, which is being out there, which is what I'm hoping Fred would do a little bit more of, is to just be honest. Just use the setting, use the mic to give your version of what you believe the truth is, versus giving it to somebody else sitting in some corner office somewhere in beautiful countryside in Italy, just writing up all kinds of SH1T. Like, might as well you come up in front of the camera and let us know how you're disappointed. And for me, a lot of Lewis's comments have been refreshing because I know he's passionate. Not that I ever questioned that, but if you were questioning if, whether Lewis is passionate or not, Spain would have told you how passionate he is. Because if he didn't care, he'd be like, "Yeah, whatever, bad race, okay, whatever, move on. I'll go to the Met Gala next week." That's not who he is, right? So I would rather see that. And the most refreshing thing for me has been seeing Charles being completely honest and saying we don't even deserve to win anything because we're slow in every corner, right? And people are picking up whether he's on nitpicking things, but missing the sort of the forest for the trees, if you will. And I just want to see that same passion from Fred when he is asked about what happens in the race, not some mumbo jumbo word salad of like we need to maximize this and we need to do better in this window and this. No, we got it wrong. We went with setup A. We shouldn't have done that, and it backfired. Guess what? We'll be better for it. When you can own it, then you can improve on it. But if you cannot own it, you're going to let someone else own it for you. That is not what you want to do.
There you go, Mark. That is an entire hour's worth
Oof,
of
blockbuster.
getting Ferrari off your chest. I feel like we've made zero progress, but you look like you feel much better having said all the stuff that you've just said. Look at this decompression from Ammar. There you go. If nothing else, we're just providing you with a public service.
Therapy.
That's
Yeah,
it. That's it.
thank you
That's it.
for this was very therapeutic, guys. Thank you very much.
As usual, if you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe. If you need therapy about your favourite team, let us know. We'll do it for you. Please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one. We'll reply to as many as we possibly can. And we will see you guys in the next one.
Later.